Medieval dwarf. In Poland, the remains of a medieval male dwarf, whose height was only 115 centimeters, were discovered. Paleopathologists believe that achondroplasia was the cause of this anomaly. The term dwarfism, nanism, is used to describe abnormally short stature, which is more than 3 standard deviations below the average height for the corresponding age and sex. Currently, scientists have more than 300 different reasons that can cause this anomaly. However, most often dwarfism is caused by achondroplasia, a genetic disease known since antiquity which is characterized by incorrect body proportions. People in this case have short arms and legs, but the size of the body remains normal. In archaeology and paleoanthropology, the oldest example of dwarfism is the remains of the man Romito II, discovered in one of the burials of the Upper Paleolithic era in the Italian cave of Romito. The earliest known case of achondroplasia dates back to ancient Egypt. In addition to human remains, there is extensive evidence of dwarfism in folklore, ancient written sources, and art monuments. Radiocarbon analysis showed that this individual died at the end of the 9th, beginning of the 11th century. That is, he was not associated with the Cistercians. It was an adult man who lived for about 30-45 years. Examination of his bones revealed a number of pathologies. Unique archaeological find. Experts discovered fragments of an old plate during archaeological research in Staromonetny Lane in Moscow, Russia. It turned out that this is a collection of French porcelain of the late 19th, early 20th century. The drawing on it is dedicated to one of the Napoleonic battles. The plate belongs to the Saraki Mines collection series and was made in France. The stigma refers to the period 1868-1919. The plate has a blue design around the edge and a graphic image in the center. In the background are the silhouettes of pyramids and palm trees, and in the foreground, horse and foot soldiers are visible. The Battle of the Pyramids took place on July 21st, 1798 between the French and Turkish-Egyptian armies. Before the battle, the French emperor said, "Soldiers, remember that 40 centuries are looking at us from the height of these pyramids." The Battle of the Pyramids marked the end of 700 years of Mamluk rule in Egypt. In 1790, the Sarrequemines factory was opened in Sarrequemines, France. Napoleon himself was considered a fan of its products. In addition, the first stations of the Paris metro were finished with tiles from Sarrequemines. In 1828, the factory produced for the first time the very popular tableware with printed engraving decor. And later, it only consolidated its success by producing products with drawings of various subjects. The restored plates will be donated to the Museum Fund of the Russian Federation. 2-meter wild woman. In India, they are called Yeti. In Australia, Yahoo. In America, Bigfoot. In Japan, they. In Russia, Antiquity or Goblin. And these are not mythical creatures, but a real living race of hominoids, the most famous representative of which was Zana. Researchers consider the Caucasus favorable for the existence of wild people. A warm climate, many animals and fruit trees in the forests. The village of Tikhina is located near Mount Zadan in Abkhazia. It was on the slope of this mountain at the end of the 19th century that hunters caught a female wild man covered from head to toe with long black and red hair. The caught wonder was brought as a gift to Prince D. Agba, who then ruled Abkhazia. But soon the prince got tired of this wild exoticism and he willingly gave it to his friend, the Kanaku Chelakwa. But he did not long endure the wild and absurd disposition of his captive. Therefore, when a neighbor, Prince Aegean, came to visit him, Chelakwa exchanged Zana for a bottle of strong chacha with relief. Ganabe was an enthusiastic person, so he decided to find out if such a savage could be tamed at all. He also gave her a name in honor of Mount Zadan. Among modern scientists, there is an opinion that the nickname Zana is very similar to the Georgian word Zangi, which means dark-skinned, black. According to the old drawings and testimonies of the Tika centenarians, we now have an idea about the appearance and habits of Zana. Her skin was very dark, her whole body from head to toe was covered with not very long black and red hair, the thickest in the lower part. On the face, the hair was very sparse and silky, but the head was decorated with a huge mop of tangled coarse hair. The palms and soles of the feet were practically hairless. She was very tall, about 2 meters tall, had huge breasts like all female hominoids, and a high fat backside. Zana's face was broad-cheeked, with large features, an outstanding massive lower jaw, and a low forehead. She was very strong and hardy, could run very fast, bathed all year round in the icy water of the spring, which now bears her name, easily lifted up to 80 kilograms with one hand. Zana never learned to speak, only mumbled and muttered, but she had a sharp ear. One of the village jokers taught her to drink wine, from which Zana first came to an excellent mood and then fell into a deep unconscious sleep. As you might know, Caucasian men are not indifferent to steep-bodied and large-breasted women, and Zana was no exception. Several children were born by the savage from local horsemen. She gave birth to the first babies without outside help, and after giving birth, she carried them to wash in a mountain river. After such a bath, babies died of hypothermia. After all, they were not 100% snow people. Therefore, the villagers began to take newborns from the wild mother and feed them by common efforts. In total, Zana's 4 children survived, 2 sons and 2 daughters. These people were endowed with speech and reason, however not without peculiarities, but they were able to fully adapt socially. The eldest son was named Janda, the eldest daughter Kajaner, the second daughter Geimeza, the youngest son Kivit. All of them in turn had full-fledged offspring settled throughout Abkhazia. Zana died during childbirth between 1885 and 1890, having lived to be about 50 years old. Where she is buried is unknown. The elders of Tikhin keep a secret. According to the concepts of the Abkhazians, it is forbidden to dig up a grave, even for scientific purposes. However, the grave of Kivit, the son of Zana, is known, and scientists hope to get the DNA of the Bigfoot. Some of the scientists claim that Zana belongs to the tribe of hominoids or Neanderthals. Others believe that Zana was a very tall, healthy, and weak-minded village girl who once went into the forest and got lost. A few years later, the Tikhin hunters found her, and until irrefutable evidence is found, both versions have the right to exist. Centennial mummies. Well-preserved mummies have been put on display at the San Bernardo Mausoleum in Colombia. 12 mummies were found in the Andes, 60 kilometers southwest of the country's capital, Bogota. Experts have determined that the samples are about 100 years old. Why they are so well preserved remains a mystery, although some experts believe it is because of the local climate and altitude, which may have affected the chemical composition of the land. Arguing what else could have preserved the mummies so well, the locals put forward their theories. In the region where the remains were found, there is a lot of chayote or guatilla, fruits rich in vitamin C, which are often added to salads. According to the residents, it was thanks to the diet that many of these people enjoyed excellent health during their lifetime, and that is why their bodies are so well preserved. The first mummified bodies on display were first discovered in the 1950s, when the local cemetery was moved to another location due to flooding. In addition to well-preserved bodies, some of the samples have preserved clothing. Unfortunately, some of the bodies belong to children. Above each grave were plaques with the names of the deceased. For example, Margarita. She was a very devoted housewife and always treated everyone to corn tortillas and coffee. Local residents visit the museum and study information about mummies with interest. Even their relatives come to look at their ancestors in the mausoleum. However, there are those who disagree with such an initiative. A Roman Catholic bishop, for example, said that such a demonstration of mummies is a sign of disrespect for the dead. 1,500 ancient artifacts. In Mexico City, on the territory of the ancient capital of the Aztecs, the city of Tenochtitlan, new archaeological excavations were carried out. A team of researchers from the National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico turned their attention to a site at the foot of the Templo Mayor, Tenochtitlan's main sanctuary. The Temple of the Templo Mayor is a step pyramid, the height of which, according to indirect data, was 60 meters. At the top of the pyramid were two temples dedicated to the Aztec gods, Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. Thanks to the archaeological work carried out, a huge number of different Indian artifacts were discovered. So among the finds were ritual masks, darts, and tools for throwing them, like atlatls, jugs, and all kinds of jewelry. In addition, about 1,500 wooden artifacts were found. The good preservation of artifacts, according to scientists, is due to the special composition of the local soil and favorable external conditions, which prevented the decomposition of wood for at least 500 years. After all, according to the current chronology, the construction of the Templo Mayor was started after 1325 AD, whereas the temple was destroyed by the Spanish conquistadors only in 1521. Such a rich collection of artifacts may indicate that they were used by the Aztec priests as religious offerings during the consecration of the main temple of Tenochtitlan. The discovery once again demonstrates that even on the territory of well-studied archaeological sites, you can still find a huge number of hiding places and ancient artifacts. Kabayan fire mummies. The Filipino people of Ibalay had one of the world's most elaborate human burial practices, a process that is more like cooking than burial and could take up to 2 years. The tombs of these remains were hidden from the world for thousands of years, until in the 1970s, a logging crew stumbled upon caves filled with oval wooden containers. In some so-called oval coffins, the bodies are still well preserved. Because the complete mummification process took up to 2 years of intense ritual practice and herbal preparation, Kabayan fire mummies tended to be deceased from the highest spectrum of the Ibala social ladder. Using salt and herbs, the bodies of the deceased were treated both internally and externally, using a mixture of salt and herbs. After proper pickling, the bodies were placed on fire, which allowed the flesh to be dried over low heat and all liquid was removed from the body. After 2 years of this process, the bones of the maid mummy became quite pliable, after which the body was laid in the position of the fetus, then the mummy was placed in an egg-shaped pine coffin. In Spain, this method of mummification was not particularly approved, and this practice was strictly prohibited. In modern times, the Kabayan caves have been vandalized, and today only 15 burials contain mummies. Where the mummies from the hundreds of others disappeared is not known. Woman in the rock. Very little is known about this archaeological find, and even British conspiracy theorists in whose homeland this artifact is still kept are almost unaware of it. Or at least it was kept before, because there has been no news about this find for many years. Moreover, there are only 2 known photographs of this find. One is black and white and was taken somewhere in the beginning of the 20th century, the other is of better quality and apparently was created in the middle or end of the 20th century. In 1810, the English fleet captured the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, which belongs to France, and among the many local trophies captured by the British and taken to England, there was a limestone slab with the skeleton of a woman without a head and hands embedded in it. It was a completely normal skeleton of the modern type and was found in a layer of limestone 1.6 kilometers long on the northeast coast of the island. In this place, the French, before the invasion of the British, found many skeletons of ancient animals and only one human skeleton, and the modern dating of this layer gives 28 million years. That is, this layer was formed 25 million years before the appearance of man as such. The slab with the skeleton was brought to the British Museum in 1812, and the scientist Carl Koenig, who examined the skeleton 2 years later, immediately ran into dating problems, confirming it was a skeleton of the modern type, but honestly admitting that he did not know how old he was. By the end of the 19th century, this skeleton of the woman from the Guadeloupe began to attract special attention of creationists, supporters of the divine theory of the origin of the world and man. According to them, an undoubtedly very ancient and yet completely modern human skeleton indicated the correctness of their beliefs and belonged to a woman who lived before the flood. However, soon the strange skeleton was removed from the museum shelf in the basement where it should still be. Until 2006, the mention of the skeleton could even be found on the official website of the British Museum, but then it was removed. No one so far as is known, has taken up a thorough study of this skeleton, has not even made such attempts. Therefore, some conspiracy theories from time to time have thought that this skeleton is on purpose hidden from the public. Not a potato, not a microbe. Archaeologists found this strange little thing in ancient deposits in China. The size of a prehistoric creature is only 1 millimeter. The oldest representative of the fauna lay underground for a very long time, about 500 million years. The archaeologists named the strange creature Saccharotus coronaris. Previously, scientists believed that the microscopic fossil is one of the earliest human ancestors, belonging to Deuterostomes bilaterally symmetrical animals. This class, as is known, includes echinoderms and chordates, including humans. But later, scientists found that the little thing, is closer rather to crabs. According to scientists, at the dawn of the origin of life on Earth, these ugly little creatures lived between soil particles. Moreover, they were precisely adults and not larvae. In the Cambrian time, the planet was inhabited by many mysterious animals. Most of the then representatives of the fauna disappeared as a result of the Great Extinction. What exactly led to the Cambrian extinction, modern scientists can only guess. Many of the creatures that lived then, paleontologists today cannot even attribute to any class. It was such a creature they found potato with a mouth and eyes. Researchers discovered Saccharotus coronaris in the Chinese province of Zhangjiakou in the rocks of the Lower Cambrian period in limestone mixed with layers apatite. Such rocks usually contain a large number of prehistoric fossils. Most of these fossils are fossils of pieces of the soft tissue of creatures. Scientists have found about 50 specimens of Saccharotus coronaris, ranging in size from 0.5 to 1 millimeter. All of them are soft oval bags in shape. Over time, the creatures were deformed by rocks, but the shapes still remained clearly visible. Giant head in the Aegean. A team of European archaeologists and divers found a giant marble head during an underwater expedition at the site of the Antiquity shipwreck in the Aegean Sea. Researchers have identified the head as a Heracles of the Phanes type. According to them, it may belong to a headless statue of a demigod, which was found in the same place in 1900 during a shipwreck. The statue is currently kept in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. 2 human teeth were also found embedded in a hard agglomerate with traces of copper, genetic material that could be analyzed to determine the sex of the person they belonged to. The researchers also found several other artifacts belonging to the ship, such as bronze, iron, and nails, but these can only be identified using X-rays. All items were handed over for conservation to the Ephorate of Underwater Antiquities of Greece. Early Iron Age swords. The swords were discovered during the construction of a new fire station in the Bavarian city of Andechs. These items were funerary. Each sword was buried in a separate grave along with the remains. Swords represent an important transitional stage from the use of bronze to the use of iron in weapons. Both are made of iron, but the earlier one was made in the shape and style of a Bronze Age sword. The later one, made in the same period, had an adapted design to take advantage of the stronger and more stable metal. The swords are 76 and 66 centimeters long and 6 centimeters wide, while the shorter one was probably mainly used used as a stabbing weapon in hand-to-hand combat, the longer and heavier one was more suitable as a stabbing weapon that a fighter could wield from above. For example, from a horse. At the Bavarian State Heritage Office in Munich, a team of restorers cleaned the swords using microfine shot blasting technology and examined them more closely. The restorers managed to find traces of a horn on one of the so-called hiltons, and the hilt was probably made from this material. Two blades also contained the remains of a layered linen weave fabric, as well as the remains of a cord that must have been wrapped around it in several places. Presumably, the weapons were wrapped in cloth and buried. The oldest traces of human life in the Arctic. Modern humans lived in the Arctic 40,000 years ago at the beginning of the late Paleolithic. This was found out by examining the bone remains of animals found in the archaeological complex in the Lower Ob. It is believed that a man of the modern type ended up in Europe and Asia 50-60,000 years ago, but scientists do not know where he lived before and how he passed the Ural Range. For a long time, it was believed that in the period 12-30,000 years ago, the north of western Siberia was covered by a glacier, and therefore it is pointless to look for archaeological traces in this region. In 2020, at the Krushevets site, in the deposits of an ancient stream, a cultural horizon full of bones was discovered, stretching for tens of meters. The stream existed for 20-40,000 years, now it has shifted down several meters. There are interesting finds that archaeologists periodically date. In particular, 2 deer antlers with traces of processing were found. This is the first discovery in this region, indicating the presence of men in this area 40,000 years ago. To determine the age of the finds, scientists use the method of accelerator mass spectrometry. This is an ultra-sensitive method of isotopic analysis in which a careful selection of the atoms of a substance is carried out with isotope counting. It allows you to date organic objects with an accuracy of up to 50 years. This work will allow us to understand the migration routes of people in the Paleolithic era and find out how people settled on the Earth. The complex language of communication in chimpanzees. Chimpanzees use a fairly rich language to communicate, the words of which they are able to combine into sentences. Experts from the Max Planck University of Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany found out. The researchers analyzed almost 5,000 conversation recordings, totaling about 900 hours, between adult chimpanzees in the Tyne National Park in Côte d'Ivoire. They were able to isolate 390 unique vocal sequences. Although it was obvious before that the sounds made by chimpanzees carry certain information, such a wide range of vocalizations came as a surprise to scientists. Vocalizations were both single and combined into chains of several and combined in different ways. In total, scientists have identified 12 different types of vocalizations, including grunts, lowing, and whining. The use of vocalizations was influenced by the context. For example, a single grunt of a chimpanzee was published at the sight of food, and a series of grunts more like a pant as a sign of a submissive greeting. Although the chimpanzee language is poorer than the human language, it turned out to be much richer and more diverse than previously thought. There are probably more possible combinations and sounds in it than we have been able to identify. Scientists hope that further research into the language of monkeys will help to learn more about the origin of language in humans. Prehistoric Swiss knife. South African archaeologists have found that mid-Stone Age African Howison sport-type tools, which are functionally very similar to Swiss army knives, looked almost the same over vast expanses. This indicates that early humans actively exchanged information and communicated with each other. The tools of the Howison sport industry were produced in huge quantities over 5 millennia and were very perfect for their time. At a later time, there was a degradation of technology, and after some time, a new takeoff. The blades made 65-60,000 years ago were in many respects superior to the stone tools of the late Stone Age, which came only 25,000 years later. Numerous highly versatile blades have been used for many different purposes, including the use as hunting tools, hand-thrown spears, and possibly also a bow and arrow, felling trees and branches, meat, bones, leather dressing, etc. At the same time, all the blades looked very similar and were made according to a uniform pattern throughout the south of the African continent. All this indicates that people of that time must have actively shared the secrets of their manufacture and other information with each other. That is, they were all then socially connected. Boar's jaw on the chest. The Skull Grotto is now in Israel. For centuries, shepherds kept goats in this grotto. Excavations began in 1928, and 3 years later, archaeologists found in the layers of the terrace in front of the grotto the skeletons of 10 ancient people, as well as more than 10,000 stone tools belonging to the Middle Paleolithic. The culture is similar to the Neanderthal. 8 male skeletons, 2 presumably female. All but one of the skeletons had bent legs. Intentional burials are suspected, although grave pits are not traceable. One of the iconic finds is 2 drilled shells, one of the oldest jewelry in the world. On the chest of the skeleton of Skull 5, between the arms, lay the lower jaw of a large boar. Sometimes they mistakenly write that it is clamped in the hand. Skeletons combine progressive archaic features. At various times, they were identified as Neanderthals, or as mestizos of Neanderthals with sapiens, now usually referred to as anatomically modern humans. Skull 5, male, 30-45 years old. The skull is massive, the forehead is sloping, the brow is large, the face is low and very wide. The chin prominence is well defined, but the chin does not protrude. The man was tall, about 179 centimeters, and had equatorial body proportions. The teeth were badly worn, there was an abscess. In addition, this man suffered from rheumatoid arthritis of the mandibular joint. Finds from Skull have been repeatedly dated by different methods. Thus, in 1999, the age of about 119,000 years was obtained by the method of thermoluminescence. The paramagnetic resonance method gave dates of 101,000 years. Family mound in Denmark. The remains of 2 of 3 people discovered in 1875 at the Borum Esche burial mound in Jutland, Denmark. The finds belong to the late Bronze Age. The remains were buried in oak coffins, which allowed them to be dated by annual rings, and are currently stored in the Musgard Museum. The barrow was over 7 meters high and almost 38 meters in diameter. At one time, it was a large monumental building with several internal stone rooms set in stones and a stone fence built in steps. Probably it was used for a long time for religious purposes to commemorate the buried, who were highly respected by their fellow tribesmen. There were several burials in the large barrow, including 3 oak coffins, which were probably originally buried here. In the first burial, the oak is dated to approximately 1351 BC. The remains belong to a woman, 50-60 years old, a man of the same age, and a young man, 20-22 years old. Perhaps they were all relatives. The body of an elderly man is well preserved, even the muscles remained. The study showed that the buried was freshly shaven and even monitored the condition of the nails. The man lay on an ox skin and was covered with woolen blanket. The buried elderly woman was of small stature and heavy build. Analysis of the skeleton showed that she worked very hard. The young man was dressed in a woolen kilt, girded with a leather belt and shod in leather boots. He still has hair, probably cut under the pot. His burial is dated by the rings of the tree from which the coffin was carved to 1345 BC. Aliens in antiquity. The concept of aliens has been around for a very long time. Long before human civilization developed a scientifically based understanding of the cosmos, people around the world looked up into the sky above and wondered what was there. Some ancient societies inhabited these vast mysterious expanses with gods, being responsible for the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. In the past, people were also often persecuted for thinking differently. This was the case even in ancient Greece, despite the fact that it was famous for its innovative philosophers. When the philosopher Anaxagoras, who was trying to give a scientific explanation for such seemingly supernatural phenomena for those times as eclipses and rainbows, suggested the moon is not a god but a large stone and the sun is also a stone but hot, he was arrested and sentenced to death. Anaxagoras also considered the possibility that the moon might be habitable, which was a highly controversial suggestion, contradicting the dominant view of the cosmos as outlined by Plato and Aristotle. The belief in the existence of other worlds was taken up by many philosophers, including Epicurus, who once wrote to the historian Herodotus that there are an unlimited number of cosmoses, and some of them are like ours, and some are not. This belief, however weak, was preserved in ancient Rome. Nothing in the universe is unique, wrote the Roman poet Lucretius, and therefore in other distant spaces there must be other lands inhabited by various tribes of people and breeds of animals. Although Plato and Aristotle lived in a pre-Christian world, their ideas about the universe helped shape the doctrine of the Christian faith. In the Middle Ages, this belief proclaimed that the earth was created by God as the center of the universe. The story of Jesus Christ, who sacrificed himself to forgive the sins of men, established humanity as the most significant of all creations. If other worlds existed, they could not be inhabited. After all, if they existed, it would automatically reduce the significance of the crucifixion. Dominican monk, mathematician, and cosmological theorist Giordano Bruno did not wait until his death to share ideas about the universe. In 3 dialogues published between 1584 and 1591, Bruno suggested that some distant stars might be suns like ours, that planets also revolve around these suns, and finally, that some of these planets may be inhabited by life similar to the Earth. These views irritated the church, and in addition, Bruno's interest in magic and the occult led to his arrest in 1592. Refusing to renounce heresy, he was burned at the stake after 7 years of imprisonment and torture. Not all participants in the scientific revolution believed in the existence of aliens. Galileo, a devout Catholic, considered the talk of extraterrestrials blasphemous. British polymath William Whewell opposed the theory of many worlds, defending a special relationship between God and humanity. But oddly enough, his religiously motivated thesis, set forth 1853 book called On the Plurality of Worlds, turned out to be more scientifically accurate than the pagan astronomers he criticized. Whewell found an ally in Alfred Russel Wallace, a British naturalist credited with formulating the theory of evolution by natural selection along with Charles Darwin. Our Earth is almost certainly the only habitable planet in our solar system, Wallace wrote in 1903. But even if life exists somewhere in the universe, Wallace was adamant that it could never reach the level of sophistication we find on Earth. Despite the fact that life outside the Earth may well exist, there has never been any evidence of this. Our telescopes do not allow a good look at potentially habitable planets, and radio observation of space does not give anything. The aliens also seem to be in no hurry to contact us. This situation is known as the Fermi paradox. It can be formulated as follows: alien civilizations must exist, but why haven't they made contact yet? 2 ancient Roman temples in the Netherlands. The temple complex was found at a clay mining site in the village of Heuven-Hameling, located in the eastern province of Gelderland near the German border. In ancient times, the border of the Roman state passed in this area, and therefore, scientists were especially surprised by this find. Nearby is Limes, a fortified borderline of the state. Research teams have discovered the remains of at least 2 Roman-era temples that were in use between the 1st and 4th centuries. One of them was of the Gallo-Roman type, had a tiled roof and richly painted walls. A slightly smaller temple stood a few meters away. A Among the artifacts found in the ruins were the remains of statues of deities, as well as pits where Roman soldiers lit sacrificial fires. Among the finds were also painted fragments of plaster and tiles with inscriptions. Based on the types of inscriptions on the tiles, archaeologists believe that the temple complex was used by soldiers since it was the military who made the tiles. In addition, several dozen small stone altars were found, where Roman soldiers brought offerings to the gods. One of the largest golden treasures in history. One of the largest, richest, and most beautiful gold treasures in Danish history has been found near the town of Jelling in Denmark. The treasure dates back to the 6th century. An amazing discovery was made by an amateur archaeologist who had recently bought a metal detector and wandered around the fields with it. Moreover, the treasure was found more than 6 months ago, in December last year, but the discovery was made public only now. The hoard weighs a little less than a kilogram and consists of saucer-sized medallions and Roman coins that have been turned into jewelry. The most important is a heavy gold coin of the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, 285-337. Some of the items have runic designs and inscriptions that can refer to the kings of that time, as well as to Scandinavian mythology. One of the finds is a bracteate flat thin coin with a series of runes and a braided male head. There is also an image of a horse and a bird. In addition, there is a runic inscription on the coin, which according to early interpretations translates as supreme. Supreme can refer both to the ruler and as especially characteristic of later mythological contexts to be associated with the god Odin. Scientists note that although there was a small city in the area during the migration period, there is no evidence that long before the rise of the Danish kingdom, there lived an unprecedented military leader or a great man who was the owner of these treasures. As experts explained, in the early 500s, some very rich but unknown person decided to bury his treasury, perhaps in the hope of saving it in case of war or as a sacrifice to higher powers. The second version is supported by the fact that at this time, the climate in Northern Europe turned upside down after a volcanic explosion in Iceland in 536, and it was for this purpose that most of the treasures of that period were buried. Gem Minaret. The Gem Minaret, located in the northwestern part of Afghanistan, was erected at the turn of the 12th and 13th centuries. But its perfect construction, stunning decor, and the skill of medieval Afghan builders are still amazed everyone who has seen this architectural masterpiece made of baked bricks. The height of the minaret is about 60 meters, according to one of the inscriptions on its walls. The building was built in 1194 in honor of the victory of Sultan Ghiyas ad-Din over the army of the ruler of the Ghaznavid dynasty. But many experts question this information. According to one version, the minaret is all that remains of the city of Thurskag, which means turquoise mountain, which during the heyday of the Guardian dynasty was the capital of the empire that covered the territories of modern Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. At the beginning of the 13th century, the armed forces of the Mongol Empire, under the command of the notorious Genghis Khan, raised the city off the face of the earth, but they somehow overlooked the tall minaret. Thanks to this inattention of the Mongols, as well as the fact that after the invasion of Genghis Khan, no one remembered the construction for almost 700 years, the architectural monument has been perfectly preserved, but at present, it is not possible to carry out comprehensive studies of the building due to the unstable socio-political situation in Afghanistan. How to find out the truth after 2,000 years. In the 1980s, on the ancient beach of the ancient Roman city, the remains of 300 townspeople were found in structures that archaeologists conditionally called boathouses, storage rooms for boats. In 79, they fled there from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. About 24 people then died on the very shore. Moreover, the majority of those killed inside the boathouses were women and children, and those who remained by the water were men. Among the latter, the attention of scientists was attracted by the skeleton of a military man. On it were found a rich belt with a sword and dagger, a bag with carpentry tools, and a considerable, for a soldier, amount of money. Anthropologists reported that at the time of his death, he was 45 years old. He was healthy and physically strong. Archaeologists suggested that it was a legionnaire who, along with several men, was waiting on the shore for a boat to rescue people who were sitting in the boathouses. The skeleton was given a conventional popular name, Soldier of Herculaneum. During the quarantine, the staff of the Archaeological Park had time to turn to the archives and revise the finds from past years. This is how the Soldier of Herculaneum had a new interpretation. First, they paid special attention to his personal belongings. The sword had an ivory hilt, a belt trimmed with gold and silver, and next to the soldier lay 2 gold and 12 silver coins. Secondly, a bag with tools is not put into a regular legionnaire. It was assumed that this is a Praetorian, but experts have no information about the deployment of the Praetorian Guard somewhere on the Naples coast. The revision of the known data from a different angle of view suggested to archaeologists a new hypothesis. Obviously, the man was not a simple legionnaire, and if you remember that the fleet was not too far from Herculaneum in Misenum, then it is more likely that he was a sailor, not a soldier. But an ordinary sailor doesn't need a bag with carpentry or carpentry tools, and he could hardly have that much money. So according to experts, he could be a naval engineer of the Mizensky fleet who worked with wood. Such an engineer was called Faber Navalis. Burial of the Bronze Age on a golf course. British archaeologists have discovered a coffin containing human remains and a stone axe with a wooden handle in a pond on a golf course in the east of England. Scientists have established that the rare find, which has survived thanks to silt, is about 4,000 years old. Apparently, the burial belonged to a person who held a high position in the local society. The early Bronze Age of Britain is usually dated from 2500 to 1200 BC. Over the millennium, bronze gradually replaced stone as a main material from which weapons and tools were made. During this period, the tradition of bell-shaped beakers turned out to be the main archaeological culture widespread in Britain. Burials of this era are inhumations. As a rule, people were buried one by one in graves under mounds. Bell-shaped goblets were often used as burial items, which is most likely associated with the arrival of migrants from Central Europe to Britain. Archaeologists told about the discovery of a rare coffin of the early Bronze Age, hollowed out of an oak trunk which had previously been split in 2 halves. It contained the remains of a man whose grave goods consisted of an axe. The lid of the coffin has not survived. Scientists suggest that the burial was made around 2000 BC. The coffin turned out to be about 3 meters long and 1 meter wide. Inside, it was lined with plants, in particular yew and juniper leaves. After he was placed in the grave, a gravel mound was poured over it, which was mainly due to people with high status in society. This find was made by accident while working in a pond at a golf course which is located in Lincolnshire. The world's oldest tattoo needles. People have been tattooing their bodies for thousands of years, but recently, archaeologists have found that ancient people began to make tattoos much earlier than previously thought. Tennessee archaeologists have discovered the oldest tattoo toolkit in the world, ranging in age from 5,520 to 3,620 years. Researchers found the tattoo kit in 1985 during the construction of a bridge near Nashville, Tennessee. At the time, scientists defined it simply as a toolbox. It has been in storage for several decades. This was one of those situations where an artifact ends up in a collection, but nothing is done with it. Tetavo took an interest in the toolbox because he mistook it for an Indian drug set. But after he teamed up with zooarchaeologist Tanya Perez of Florida State University, scientists realized that they had something else in their hands: ancient tattoo needles. The set contained turkey bone needles, pigment-filled shell hooves, and stone tools. The signs of wear, discovered by another archaeologist, Christian Gates St. Pierre, helped to understand the true purpose of the needles. He and Perez also found traces of red and black pigment on the tips of the bones. They believe that the bones were used as needles for tattoos and the dyed shells were used as ink pots. Based on radiocarbon dating, de Wolf and Perez also determined their age. This suggests that ancient people in North America used tattoos more than 1,000 years earlier than previously thought. Because tattoos leave marks and human skin degrades over time, it is difficult for scientists to understand the scope and significance of tattoos in ancient cultures. Emerald Tablet. Unlike other archaeological finds, the Emerald Tablet has not survived to our time, so scientists do not know who was the author of the original of this document, what it was intended for, and what fate befell the monument of medieval Oriental art. The only thing that is known for certain about the Emerald Tablet is that it was first mentioned in an Arabic book dated to the 6th or 8th century AD. In some early copies of the tablet made by Arabic translators, there is information that the original was written in the ancient Syrian language, but experts have no evidence of this yet. The earliest of the Latin translations of the tablet dates back to the 12th century. Later, several more versions of the text were created. The authorship of one of them belongs to the famous scientist Sir Isaac Newton. According to some scientists, the Emerald Tablet describes the technology of converting various metals into gold using a mythical substance known as the Philosopher's Stone. But so far, no one has been able to carry out this alchemical experiment. Probably the Latin and Arabic translators of the original instructions are not too accurate. Discovered the real relics of St. Peter. A sensational find was made by a worker in the Roman church of Santa Maria in Capella. During the restoration work under a stone slab at the altar, he discovered two ancient clay jugs with the name of the first popes, Peter, Felix, Callistus, and Cornelius. And as you know, the Apostle Peter was the first Roman bishop, that is, the first pope of Rome. For the past 35 years, this church has been closed due to its dilapidated state. Finally, in 2021, restoration work began in it. When one of the workers lifted a stone slab next to the ancient altar, he saw a cache. It contained dilapidated clay jugs, on the lids of which the names of the first popes were written. The fact that the remains of the first saints are kept in the Church of Santa Maria in Capella has been known for a long time. However, who exactly was not known. Also, the sources say that it is here that the tunic of the Mother of God is kept, but so far it is considered a lost relic. The found remains were transferred to Vatican, but there was no official statement that these were the relics of St. Peter. The rector of the church, Father Massimiliano Floridi, believes that until an examination is made, it is not worth saying that these are definitely the relics of St. Peter. But the most interesting thing is that in the 1960s, under the Basilica of St. Peter on the Vatican Hill, a tombstone was found with an inscription in Greek, Patros Ani, Peter is here. In the tomb was found the body of a man about 60 years old who lived according to research in the 1st century AD. He was dressed in rich robes embroidered with gold, but his head was missing. And in 1968, Paul VI officially recognized them with the relics of Saint the Apostle Peter. And here they are. Scientists are sure that the find in the Church of Santa Maria in Capella is precisely the real relics of the Apostle Peter. The point in this unusual discussion perhaps will put a comparative genetic analysis. After all, it may happen that the results will coincide, or not, time will show. Palace of the King of the World. In 2014, ISIS troops destroyed a historical monument, a tombstone, according to historians, belonging to the prophet Jonah. After the liberation of the territory, archaeologists assessing the damage caused discovered another historical relic under the tomb: the remains of the palace of the powerful Assyrian king Esarhaddon, who ruled around the 7th century BC, whom contemporary historians called the King of the Wolves. 7 surviving clay tablets describe the king and his reign. The inscription, for example, is similar to that made on the gates of the palace in Nineveh, the former capital of Assyria, now in Iraqi territory, and describes Esarhaddon as a great king and mighty king of the wolves. The ruined tomb of Jonah is located in Mosul, which from 2014 to 2017 remained under the rule of ISIS. On the walls of the palace discovered under it, there are Assyrian bas-reliefs made more than 2,000 years ago. The tomb of Jonah was revered among Muslims for many years because this prophet is also one of the holy prophets of Islam, where he bears the name Yunus. Clay tablets found at the site describe Esarhaddon as the king of the wolves who rebuilt the ancient cities of Babylon and Esagil during his reign. At the beginning of the 21st century, the corridors of the palace, buried by time, were used by ISIS for military purposes, and they considered the found ancient artifacts as loot. Old underground tunnel. During construction work to place the fountain on the central square of Vladivostok, Russia, a mysterious tunnel was discovered at a depth of 4 meters. A tunnel with a vaulted ceiling is made of rubble stone and leads in the direction of Vladivostok GUM. Most likely, the tunnel played the role of a drainage system that diverted wastewater from the city towards the sea. Such drainage systems are not uncommon. Diggers know that, for example, there are 160 underground rivers in Moscow, most of which are removed into collectors. The most famous of these underground rivers is the Naglinka. A year ago, during construction work in Kiev, a tunnel was also discovered, which served as a drainage system. In Vladivostok, construction work was temporarily suspended until the value of the object was clarified. It was decided to mothball the outlet of the old drainage system and continue the construction of the fountain. Interestingly, a find was made inside this tunnel. Researchers have found pieces of the 19th century Chinese pottery that date back to the Qing dynasty. This finding may indicate that the tunnel could have been built by hired Chinese workers. Secrets of the largest book in the world. The origin of this ancient gigantic book is unknown. In the Middle Ages, it was equated with the 7 wonders of the world. For over 700 years, this ancient manuscript has fascinated scholars. The existence of the book is associated with a certain legend that should have worried the church, but the truth is that this ancient manuscript was never condemned by the Inquisition. That the church would allow a Bible that portrays the devil sounds like a contradiction, but in this case, it is true. According to one legend, the creation was written by a monk, assisted by the devil himself. Codex Gigas, which means the giant book, is also known as the Devil's Bible. This is the largest medieval manuscript in the world. The true origin of the codex is unknown, but a note in the manuscript shows that it was created as early as 1295 at the Benedictine monastery of Podlasice in Bohemia, today known as the modern Czech Republic. Soon after, the manuscript ended up in another monastery in Brno, near Prague. Later, in 1594, Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Bohemia and King of Hungary, Croatia and Slavonia, took the codex to his castle, where it was kept until it was stolen by the Swedish army during the 30 Years' War. It became a part of the collection of Queen Christina of Sweden. Today, the Bible is kept in the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. On September 24, 2007, 359 years later, the Swedes gave permission to exhibit the manuscript in Prague. The conditions for the issuance of the code were strict, and the state had to guarantee the Bible in the amount of $15 million. In January 2008, the Devil's Bible was safely returned to the National Library in Stockholm. This is a truly gigantic book, and naturally, it has been compared to the Seven Wonders of the World in the Middle Ages. The Bible weighs almost 75 kilograms and requires 2 librarians to lift it. The codex has 312 parchment folios, hence 624 pages, and is 890 millimeters high and 490 millimeters wide. The codex includes the complete version of the Bible and is written in Latin. There are also several short texts in the manuscript. The first is the Work of Repentance, a manual for priests with a list of sins and the corresponding methods of atonement. Parts of this work make it clear that it was written by a church leader who committed sins. The code also contains a magical formula on how to overcome evil, unhappiness, and disease. Inside, there is a calendar containing a list of saints and local bohemians. The calendar was used to keep track of the holidays of the church. Everything indicates that this was the life work of one person. According to historians, the scribe in question probably spent as many as 20 years on such a monumental work. The reason why Codex Gigas is referred to as the Bible of the Devil is because there is a depiction of the devil in the large book. The demon lord's portrait is the most famous depiction in the Giga Codex. It is not uncommon to find images of the devil in ancient medieval manuscripts and other works, but this one is slightly different. On the one side, the devil is illustrated alone and takes up a whole page, depicted in an empty landscape standing between 2 large towers and raising his arms up in the air. He has only 4 fingers and toes. This illustration was painted to depict the devil as the prince of darkness. According to legend, a monk who once lived in a monastery in Podlajice, Czech Republic, was sentenced to death for his sins. To avoid punishment, he promised to write the largest book in the world in one night, which would make the monastery famous. He soon realized the task was beyond his powers, and he called for the help of the devil, who demanded the monk's soul as payment. When the book was finished, the monk drew a picture of the devil to thank him for his support. Legend has it that the monk escaped punishment, but he lost his peace of mind and his life turned into hell. This is a strange world we live in. It can be assumed that the legend of the creation of the world's largest book worried the Pope and the Church, but this was not so. Despite its inconclusive source, this medieval manuscript was never condemned by the Inquisition. On the contrary, it has been studied by a number of scientists. Grave with a full set of weapons. Norwegian archaeologists, while carrying out field work in the central part of the country, unearthed a grave of about 1,100 years old, in which a Viking warrior rested, buried with all his weapons. Researchers write that a man who died around 800–900 AD is buried in the grave. His burial was found near the historic village, which today bears the name of Viniera. It is located south of Trøndelag County. The man was buried with a full set of weapons: an axe, a spear, a shield, and a sword. This says a lot about the status of the buried. First, as archaeologists have established, this man was a free man and a farmer. Second, he was a warrior. During the Viking and early Middle Ages, most warriors were free people who had their own farms. It is the sword that makes this grave special. It's not even about its good preservation. The sword was laid on the left side, although earlier in similar burials, swords were always found on the right side of the deceased. This led scientists to the idea that the warrior was left-handed. Although in this regard, the burial practice of the Vikings looks a little strange. It would seem that for a right-handed person, it is more convenient to lay the sword to the left, so that the warrior can freely grab it with his right hand. However, these weapons were always stowed to the right. In this case, the ritual was broken. By the way, the grave of the alleged left-handed warrior partially overlapped the graves of 3 other warriors buried in the ditch. It surrounded one of the large mounds. These people obviously did not enjoy great honor and respect. In addition, in ancient times, burials were often used several times. In the same ring ditch, archaeologists discovered a 4th grave, which surprised them. Probably a woman was buried there who was cremated either at an early stage of the Viking Age or before it. Funerary gifts were found in this burial: a well-preserved bead bead, an oval brooch, and scissors. It was from these artifacts that the sex of the buried person was determined. Ring of Signation. Signatian's ring was found in Britain in the late 1700s. It is very large, weighs 12 grams, has a peculiar design and an inscription in Latin, Signation, live in peace with God. A few decades later, an ancient clay tablet was found that was related to the ring. The inscription on it was made by a certain Roman named Silvian, who complained to the god Nodens that his ring had been stolen by Signation. The tablet said, "He who bears the name of Signation will not have a single grain of health until he returns the ring to the temple of Nodens." To many, these details will sound familiar. Oxford University professor and aspiring author John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was intimately familiar with the story of the cursed ring and used it in his novel The Lord of the Rings. Ancient mummies in the mine. In Chile, while working to expand the copper mine, workers came across 4 mummies that are likely to be over 2,000 years old. The remains of 4 mummified people dressed in bright colors have been found in the Quebrada Blanca copper mine in northern Chile. These people were buried in official graves, that is, a certain ritual was observed during their burial. The mummies are reported to be very well preserved, which was probably facilitated by the arid climate. People were buried wearing exquisite turban-like headdresses and sandals. Now scientists are analyzing to determine the exact age of the finds. By indirect evidence, they have already established that the mummies may belong to the early period of the formation of Mesoamerica, which lasted approximately between 1100 and 400 BC. As a result of soil salinity, lack of rainfall, and relatively low humidity, the remains were mummified in full gear, along with a number of tools indicating the lifestyle of these people. By the way, scientists will now keep a close eye on the mine, as it is planned to be used for almost 30 more years. This means that it will continue to expand, therefore, workers may stumble upon other burials and artifacts. Maori whip. Captain James Reid Clanden was one of the first European settlers in New Zealand. He promoted dialogue between the indigenous Maori people and the European colonialists, was the chairman of the first Bank of New Zealand and the first US consul in the country. The Clanden House Museum contains many items and artifacts, many of which once belonged to the Maori tribe. Apparently, the thief who once climbed into the museum did not know that all Maori artifacts bring a curse to those who mistreat them. He stole a Maori whip with a handle made from whalebone. The stolen thing returned to the museum a month later. It was personally handed over by a friend of the thief, saying that before that, the gates to hell had opened. All misfortunes fell upon him. The thief was never charged, given that the whip returned and the thief had already been punished by some higher court. Mammoth tusk carving technology. Siberian archaeologists have studied figurines carved from mammoth ivory and managed to reconstruct the technology used by ancient people to create items about 20,000 years ago. Archaeologists from the Siberian Federal University and Novosibirsk State University, Russia, during excavations discovered unique beads and other jewelry made from mammoth tusk. Thanks to the technologies used, the figurines have a unique character of fulfillment. However, scientists managed to reconstruct this technology in detail. Scientists have discovered unique jewelry in the Kazhamsky district of the Krasnoyarsk territory at the mouth of the Kova River. Siberian archaeologists have been conducting research here for several decades. In addition to beads, scientists managed to find tools and other ancient things in this place. The world's first thread. Somewhere in the era of the Upper Paleolithic in the territory of today's western Georgia, a man invented a thread. It would seem an ordinary invention, but it changed a lot, allowing our ancestors to weave unmanned cloth, create shoes, and surround themselves with simple interior items. In general, one more step into modern civilization which humanity has made on the territory of our country. Before this find, a natal find found in the Czech Republic was considered the oldest thread from the Imereti region, but the Georgian linen thread discovered in 2007 is almost 5,000 years older. Holy Grail of the Nazis. In 2001, a Bavarian diver found a pot made of 10.5 kilograms of gold at the bottom of the local lake Chiemsee, 70 kilometers east of Munich. The artifact had value in itself, but the researchers were confused by the coinage made in the style of Celtic counterparts 2,000 years ago. In particular, scientists were well aware of the so-called Gundestrup pot discovered in 1891 in the Danish peat box, a superb preserved silver vessel with rich Celtic decoration. It has been dated to the 1st millennium BC. However, after the examination, it was found that the pot from Chiemsee was made relatively recently, most likely in the 1930s. Further, it turned out that a certain Alfred Knott, a jeweler of the Munich company Theodor Hayden, told in the 1960s before his death that in the early 1930s he made a certain golden pot, weighing about 10 kilograms by order of Albert Pitch, a major industrialist and director of the Elektrochemische Werke Munich. Pitch, a staunch Nazi and a supporter of Hitler, eventually received the high title of Wehrwirtschaftsführer, leader of the war economy, which was given to the heads of the most important enterprises of the Third Reich. Apparently, it was he who ordered the discovery in Lake Chiemsee. It is not clear how it ended up at the bottom of the reservoir, but it is known that on the shores of the lake it was planned to build a monumental complex of the highest school of the NSDAP, the main and most elite Nazi university, which was to become the leading educational and scientific center of the entire Third Reich. It is possible that the pot, made in the image and likeness of the ancient Celtic vessels, could be intended for this organization. The Nazis knew a lot about this kind of artifacts with a semi-esoteric function. One of the main mysteries of Jerusalem. In Israel, archaeologists during excavations in Jerusalem discovered unique seals about 2,500 years old. The decoding of the symbols printed on them showed that the city of David was not abandoned by the inhabitants after the Babylonian conquest. One of the black spots in the history of Jerusalem is the period of the so-called Babylonian conquest or Babylonian captivity. It is mentioned in the Bible. It is known that the city of David was destroyed by the Babylonian army in 586 BC. However, practically nothing is known about what happened in the city in subsequent years. One popular hypothesis is that the surviving townspeople fled and settled elsewhere. Seals found in Jerusalem indicate that bureaucracy flourished in Jerusalem during this little studied period of time, and this means that the city continued to live and gradually recovered. Rare artifacts have been discovered during excavations near the walls of the old city. Previously, only 10 such artifacts were found in all of Israel, dating from the Persian period, circa 536 BC, 333 BC. The seals were made from clay. One of them apparently was official, and the second was made in a handicraft way. Perhaps it was a fake seal or a seal made by an illiterate official who stood at the lowest hierarchical level. According to archaeologists, the artifacts indicate that there were several levels of bureaucracy in the resurgent Jerusalem. The Bible also talks about the bureaucracy that existed in Jerusalem during this period of time. Treasure with coins over 1,000 years old. During archaeological excavations in Israel, teenage volunteers found a clay vessel with 425 gold coins, buried about 1.1 thousand years ago. According to the publication, most of the coins date from the period of early Islam, when the region was part of the Abbasid Caliphate. The coins are made of 24-karat gold and weight 845 grams. At that time, these coins could buy a luxurious house in one of the cities of the Caliphate. The man who buried this treasure 1,100 years ago must have wanted to come back for it, even securing the vessel with a nail to keep it from moving. Finding such a large cache of gold coins is extremely rare, they say, as the gold was often melted down and reused in later cultures. Burial with round graves. In Osaka, in preparation for the construction of a new railway station, a burial with round graves was discovered, in which 350 people were buried. The place where the excavations are being carried out is called Umida's tomb. This is one of the 7 burials in Osaka known to scientists. In addition to round graves, archaeologists have found vertical burials, which contain the remains of several people. Scientists believe that people who died as a result of illness could be buried in common graves. The burial dates from the end of the Edo period, which lasted from 1603 to 1868. Also, bones of piglets and horses were found at the site of the burial ground. A cat bone was found in one of the human burials. Now all human remains are sorted and analyzed. After that, they will be reburied in a new place. Remains of an ancient man. Georgia is the birthplace of the European. Yes, dear Germans, Italians, and French, you heard me right. You all come from Georgia. In the 90s of the last century, a real sensation was found on the territory of this country. Female and male bones whose age was about 1.8 million years. Scientists dubbed the found Zezva anemzia, gave the new species the name Homo georgicus, Georgian man, and proved that these are the oldest representatives of the Homo genus after those found in Africa. This allows us to authoritatively state that European civilization originates precisely in Georgia. Detailed description of the made-up artifact. To this day, not only images of the appearance of Vedras have survived, but also descriptions of their work. According to Indian myth, the Vedra was an ideal weapon. It always hit the target, but it was as strong as a diamond and never broke. But how could a fictional artifact ever break if it is completely fictional? We are talking about lightning here. Why even invent an object to shoot with if the gods could directly command them? Again, the logical failure of the official versions of history. After all, it doesn't make any sense. Descriptions of the characteristics of the Vedra about strength and accuracy give reason to think, but was it not a real object? It has two earthly and ordinary characteristics for divine attributes. And from the descriptions of the Vedra, we can conclude that although it did not break, it was possible to hit it, and since it did not miss enemies, it could shoot at non-enemies as well. That is, the descriptions of the divine artifacts are more suitable for a real-life object than a simple fiction. In my opinion, the official versions of history now have so many logical failures that it is easier to believe in the Indian Mahabharata than in them. Wooden figurine of Chimps culture. Archaeologists, during excavations at the site of Wakatakanamo, which is attributed to the Chimps culture, discovered a perfectly preserved wooden figurine. This artifact, measuring 47 by 16 centimeters, depicts an anthropomorphic character with a face painted red. According to scientists, the discovered product emphasizes the ritual function of the object where it was found. In the 9th–15th centuries AD, the Chimps culture flourished on the northern coast of Peru. It was formed in the valley of the Moche River on the basis of the Mochica culture. Late Chimps monuments are identified with the taste of chimor, founded by Takanamo at the beginning of the 13th century and conquered by the Incas around 1470. The figure has a flat, oval-shaped face painted red, as well as a protruding nose. Inside the almond-shaped eyes as well as the ears, the researchers found the remains of black resin, which may have been used to attach mother-of-pearl plates. On the head of this figure is a trapezoidal headdress decorated with 7 alternating light and dark vertical stripes. The left arm of the anthropomorphic character is bent at the elbow and pressed to the body, while the right arm is extended along it. On the figure's belt is a loincloth or some analog of a triangular skirt. It seems that originally the torso and arms were also painted red. According to researchers, the discovered figurine confirms the ritual function of the structure where it was found. One of the oldest mosques in the world. Israeli archaeologists have discovered a rare ancient mosque in the country's south that experts say sheds light on the region's transition from Christianity to Islam. The remains of the mosque, believed to be over 1,200 years old, were discovered during construction work on a new quarter in the Bedouin town of Reid. The mosque, located in the Negev desert, consists of a square room and a wall facing Mecca, with a semicircular niche in that wall pointing south. These unique architectural features show that the building was used as a mosque. Not far from the mosque, a luxurious estate was also found with the remains of dishes and glass artifacts, indicating the wealth of its inhabitants. 3 years ago, authorities excavated nearby another mosque from the same era dating from the 7th to 8th centuries AD, calling the 2 Islamic temples among the earliest known in the entire world. Mosques, estates, and other houses found nearby illuminate the historical process that took place in the northern Negev with the emergence of a new religion, the religion of Islam, as well as a new rule and culture in the region. 2 mysterious holes. Known scientifically as SK54, this skull has given a team of paleontologists at the University of Johannesburg numerous headaches due to mysterious holes that are visible on its surface. This skull belongs to a young Paranthropus solidus, Australopithecus solidus, which lived on the lands of South Africa a little over 1.5 million years ago. The first clue to the puzzle came from other remains found in the same Sterkfontein cave. The hominids that the researchers believe they belonged to were killed elsewhere, after which the attacker took them to his lair. The second clue was the diameter of the holes and the distance between them. Paleozoologists helped in the study. They found the alleged culprit, the panther Pardus beguini, the ancestor of our leopard. This they confirmed using various fossilized skulls of these animals and even analyzing the trajectories and pressure points of carrying leopard bites. Australopithecus from the cradle of humankind. Archaeologists have clarified the age of Australopithecus, the fossilized remains of which were found at the Sterkfontein site. Cosmogenic dating has showed that South African individuals lived 3.7 million years ago, and not 2.6 million years ago as previously thought. The revised age makes the South African hominins contemporaneous with the Alpha and some other Middle Pliocene Australopithecines. On the territory of the Republic of South Africa, not far from Johannesburg, there is a complex of monuments called the Cradle of Humankind, which is included in the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. On an area of about 474 square kilometers, there are many limestone caves that are rich in fossil remains. Fossilized remains were found in this place, in particular African Australopithecus, Australopithecus sediba, Paranthropus, Handyman, Iceman, and some other hominine species. The excavations yielded a huge collection of finds. By the end of the 20th century, more than 300 fossils were known that belonged to African and massive Australopithecus, early Homo. The most famous among these finds is the STS-5 Australopithecus skull, found back in 1947 and known as Mrs. Pless. Unlike most East African sites of such antiquity, it is difficult to date the finds from Sterkfontein because it does not contain volcanic deposits that can be dated with reliable physical methods. After conducting a huge number of analyses, archaeologists concluded that all the fossilized remains of Australopithecus found in Sterkfontein date back to about 3.7–3.4 million years ago. In South Africa, the Australopithecus of Sterkfontein lived about 1 million years before Paranthropus, early Homo, and Sediba Australopithecus. Network of 3,000-year-old tunnels. Thousands of years ago, in the Andes on the territory of today's Peru, there was an ancient Chavin people who left behind a temple complex in Chavin de Huanta, under which a huge network of tunnels and galleries was discovered not so long ago. Archaeologists from Stanford University are sure that the hidden rooms were used for religious rituals. As the lead author of the new study, John Rick, noted, some of the dark, isolated rooms could be used for something like sensory deprivation. The larger galleries, however, were clearly places for religious ceremonies. Archaeologists have clarified that the hidden rooms in question cannot be considered tunnels in the literal sense because they are not dug into the ground but are built inside a large temple complex which was built in several stages between 1200 BC and 200 AD. The passages remained hidden from outsiders for 3,000 years. It took scientists 15 years of excavation to discover 36 galleries connected by tunnels. The study of this archaeological site continues, so new significant discoveries are ahead of the researchers. Ancient zigzag object. Chinese archaeologists have studied the historical monument of Aegean and found traces of ritual sacrifices from the early stage of the Xia dynasty. According to CGTN, an unusual ceremonial structure stands out among the finds. Aegean is a famous ancient site in Yuzhou, in the central Chinese province of Henan. There is a large sacred complex here, which is believed to have been erected around 2 millennia BC. Then, about 4,000 years ago, the Xia dynasty ruled in China, the capital of which was the city of Aegean. Archaeologists have discovered an unusual ancient structure, a zigzag object that is 31 meters long and 26 meters wide. The area of the strange structure is approximately 800 square meters. At the base of the unique object, traces of rich sacrifices were found, for example, the skeletons of various animals, as well as shells of mollusks. It is assumed that these are the remains of grandiose feasts that were held here as an element of ritual ceremonies. Scientists hope to make new discoveries at the Aegean site, which will help to understand the history of this place. Finds with traces of teeth of medieval shoemakers. In modern Ryazan in Russia, during excavations, many pieces of shoe leather with bites were found, which are several centuries old. One of the notable finds is the top of a boot, which was used as a gag. Here, on the southeastern section of the Kremlin, in the 15th–16th centuries, there was a shoemaker's shop. When processing the finds, experts noticed that many fragments of the skin retain traces of human teeth. These imprints are most clearly seen immediately after the removal of the skin from the wet cultural layer, and later, upon drying, the traces disappeared. But if the skin was moistened, then they show through again. These traces were found on a variety of leather fragments, on cut pieces, on shoe parts, on household items, and even on the so-called planta thick leather. They were different, clear and weak, located in a single semicircular group or several groups, and sometimes overlapped and even merged with each other. Archaeologists examined the prints under a microscope at optical magnification up to 40 times. By the nature of the prints, it became clear that the artisans left them when working with the skin. With the help of their own teeth, they held the blanks, scraped, stretched, and even chewed the skin to soften it a little. Found traces of teeth of people of different ages. The teeth of the inhabitants of the medieval Pereyaslav-Ryazanski were relatively even. Malocclusion was found found on 4 prints out of 16 studied in detail. One notable find is the shaft of a leather boot, which, judging by the teeth marks, was used as a gag. Mummy of a paralyzed after a stroke woman. Scientists using an X-ray machine examined an ancient Egyptian mummy buried with a crutch and found that it belonged to a woman who died at the age of 25-40. Her skeletal pathologies indicated that she had suffered a stroke that resulted in paralysis on the left side of her body. According to the researchers, the red shroud of this 2,700-year-old mummy emphasizes the woman's high social status. The development of paleoradiology, that is, the study of bioarchaeological materials using modern imaging methods, radiography, computed tomography, and magnetic resonance imaging, three-dimensional reconstruction, and some other technologies introduced into medical practice at the end of the 20th century, allowed scientists to make significant progress in the study of mummified remains. In recent years, a large number of studies of Egyptian mummies have appeared using paleoradiological methods. This allowed us to take a fresh look at the evolution of a wide range of infectious and vascular diseases, as well as tumors. For example, a recent study showed that 29 out of 76 ancient Egyptians studied suffered from atherosclerosis. In addition, paleopathologists have found evidence of widespread tuberculosis in ancient Egypt, including among children, as well as malaria. Scientists noted that the mummy attracted attention with its red linen shroud, which covered her head and body. The remains belonged to a woman who died at the age of 25-40. The researchers drew attention to the fact that her right arm was extended along the body, while the left was bent and pressed to her chest, and the hand was twisted. In addition, the woman's head was facing down, and the position of the left tibia indicated that the foot was turned inward. The bones of the feet themselves are missing. The woman suffered from damage to the right hemisphere of the brain. Apparently, after the age of 23-25, she suffered a stroke, which led to paralysis of the left side of her body. However, she lived with this for a long period. This is indicated by the difference in the thickness of the cortical bone. According to scientists, this is the oldest recorded case of stroke described in the paleopathological literature. Remains of white and red wine. Chemists and paleobotanists conducted a study of the contents of 3 Roman amphoras found on the seabed of the coast of Lazio. Inside these vessels, they found the remains of resin extracted from pine trees, pollen, and plant tissues, including the remains of grapes. Analysis showed that wine was stored in amphorae, 2 of which were white and 1 was red. In the era of antiquity, the leading role in the Mediterranean trade was played by the transport of grain, olive oil, and wine. For the storage and transportation of these goods, amphoras were used, usually clay vessels with an expanded upper and narrower lower part of the body, a narrow neck, and 2 handles. The manufacture of amphorae was of mass nature, and each production center followed a certain standard of shape and volume. By the shape and size, one can usually judge what kind of product the amphora was intended for. For example, pot-bellied for olive oil and narrower and taller for wine. The inner surface of the latter was sometimes covered with resin. Resin, like clay with lime, was also used to seal the throat. A group of scientists from Italy and France, led by Donatella Magri from the University of La Sapienza in Rome, examined 3 ancient Roman amphoras found in 2018 on the seabed near the modern harbor of the Italian commune of San Felice Sersio. From the bottom and inner walls of all 3 amphoras, scientists took samples of organic materials for chemical research using gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, as well as paleobotanical analysis. As a result of the analysis, chemists found out that inside the amphoras there was a resin obtained from pine trees. All samples also contained tartaric, malic, and pyruvic acids, and 1 amphora also contained syringic acid. In addition, in the resin, scientists also found acid esters obtained from acids and alcohol. Chemical analysis indicated that the SFC1 amphora contained red wine, while the SFC2 and SFC5 contained white wine. Dead turtle with egg in Pompeii. The general public is used to the fact that if archaeologists find the remains of living creatures during excavations in Pompeii, then they are usually associated with the catastrophic eruption of Vesuvius in 79. It was then that Pompeii itself and other small cities in the vicinity of the volcano perished, and the surviving people moved to the big cities of Campania, for example Naples and Capua. However, the new find refers to a different period of the city's existence, the years between two natural disasters. In 62, an earthquake occurred in the Italian Campania. It was quite serious, although tremors for Campania are not such a rare occurrence. After this earthquake, Pompeii found itself in a rather difficult situation. Both private houses and public buildings were damaged. Moreover, some were so destroyed that they had to be dismantled, freeing the land for new construction. Excavations were carried out in a shop almost next to the main entrance to the bath. This site was also badly damaged during the earthquake and for some time stood abandoned. It was during this period that the turtle, planning to lay an egg, found refuge in it. However, for some reason, this shelter did not suit her. And I must say that reptiles, including turtles, are able to delay the laying of eggs. This reaction of the reptile's body to stress, the lack of a comfortable nest or danger, is called dystocia. Experts at the Pompeii Archaeological Park believe that it was dystocia that prevented the turtle from successfully laying an egg, and she died with it inside. By the way, this turtle is not the only turtle found in Pompeii, but usually their remains were found in gardens or rich houses where they could live like pets, and they didn't have any eggs. Tiny votive vessel. A tiny clay vessel measuring 3 centimeters was found in the ancient city of Troy, located in Hizalik in modern Turkey, 30 kilometers southwest of Çanakkale. During archaeological excavations in the ancient city of Troy, an intact one of the tiny vessels was found for the first time, symbolically presented to the gods by those who did not have money in the sanctuary and who could not make other offerings. Archaeologists have stumbled upon a 2,300-year-old vessel made of the finest clay, which has a symbolic meaning. Previous excavations at Troy revealed that the site was a sanctuary. The area has been turned into a holy place thanks to the history of the Trojan War and the history of heroism. Troy is a very important center. This is a rare ancient city that still retains this feature. The 4,000-year-old ancient city of Troy perched atop the Hizalik Mounts and dominating the Turkish Aegean coastal plain is one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. The first excavations in the ancient city were carried out in 1870 by the German entrepreneur Heinrich Schliemann. Europe's largest dinosaur skeleton. The remains of a representative of the species of the largest dinosaurs were found in the garden behind a residential building in the city of Pombal. The excavations began in 2017 when the owner of the house noticed fragments of a fossilized bone in his garden and contacted researchers from the University of Lisbon. Scientists have found the remains of a Brachiosaurus at the site, the largest of all dinosaurs and land animals that have ever existed on Earth. Brachiosaurs were herbivores, had long necks, and walked on 4 legs. The size of the bones suggests that the dinosaur was 12 meters high and 25 meters long. It is unusual to find all the ribs of such an animal, let alone retain their original anatomical position. Since the skeleton was found in a natural pose, the researchers hope that further excavations will be able to unearth more parts of the same dinosaur. Paleontologists believe that the animal died about 150 million years ago. Bird from Saqqara. Have you ever heard of the mysterious story of the Saqqara bird? Perhaps this is one of the most interesting objects that scientists managed to discover at the end of the 19th century. In 1898, an Egyptian archaeologist, Dr. Khalil Masika, excavated a burial site at Sappho. There, he accidentally discovered an unusual figurine of a bird. It was small and light, but it had a very interesting shape. The body of the figurine resembled a bird, but its wings looked exactly like the wings of a modern jet plane. They are made as a single element made from a single piece of wood, which is thickened in the middle and thinned at the ends. All this suggests that more than 2,000 years ago, the Egyptians had quite serious knowledge in the field of aerodynamics. That is why the find led Egyptologists into confusion, giving rise to many theories and disputes. What's more, when scientists made a copy of the figurine and tested it, they were able to verify that it could glide several meters by simply tossing the model into the air. The opinions of scientists are divided. Some argue that the resemblance of this bird to an airplane is completely accidental, while others believe that its author was an Egyptian genius who actually created a model of a modern aircraft. Woman in canoe. 800 years ago, mourners buried a young woman in a ceremonial canoe to send her on her last journey to the land of the dead in what is now Patagonia, according to a new study. This discovery disproves the theory that canoe burials could only have been used after Spanish colonization and confirms ethnographic and historical evidence that they were practiced throughout pre-Hispanic South America. The remains were found at an excavation site called Nuyan Antac near Lake Laca in western Argentina. The wooden canoes of the time, known as wampos, were hollowed out using fire. According to the analysis, the woman at the time of death was from 17 to 25 years old, but the cause of death could not be determined. They also found a jar near the head and almost 600 charred pieces of wood from a single Chilean cedar. The find is indeed unusual because most canoe burials were for men. Previous research has shown that burying people in canoes was part of the ritual to allow the dead to make their final journey through mystical waters to another land known as Namelofkin, where they would live in a place known as the destination of souls. Dinosaur footprints in Texas. American researchers found dinosaur footprints in Texas. Paw prints of a huge reptile, 4.5 meters tall, Acrocanthosaurus, were found in a dry riverbed after a severe drought caused the water level to drop. 113-million-year-old dinosaur footprints were discovered after a severe drought dried up a river in Texas. The footprints belong to a 4-meter Acrocanthosaurus, weighing 7 tons, and were discovered by experts in the Dinosaur Valley State Park. According to local experts, some of the prints also belong to Zava Poseidon, which was about 18 meters tall and weighed about 44 tons. Dinosaur Valley State Park boasts many dinosaur footprints, mostly ancient sauropods and theropods, but this is the first time these particular footprints have been seen. Sauropods include herbivorous dinosaur species such as Diplodocus and Brontosaurus, which had large flat feet like an elephant, while theropods such as Tyrannosaurus rex had clawed, three-toed feet. Acrocanthosaurus was, in terms of kinship, a cousin of Tyrannosaurus rex. The footprints in the park are believed to date back to the mid-Cretaceous, when the Dallas region of Texas was on the seashore. Inscription in Old Russian. This is a very interesting and controversial artifact. They have been working on reading it for more than 70 years. Although it seems that all the letters are legible, it's all about interpretation. Well, the very age of the find also adds space for discussion. Usually, the spread of writing in Russia is associated with baptism. The Cyrillic alphabet, which is used now, is considered to be the invention of the Enlightenment brothers, Cyril and Methodius. Although, to be completely honest, they invented the Glagolitic alphabet, and the Cyrillic alphabet was developed by one of the Cyril's students, the Bulgarian monk Clement of Ohrid. It is important that Cyrillic writing arrived in Russia in a monastic convoy. It was originally invented in order to make Christian texts available to the Slavs. The first books in Cyrillic are translations of the Holy Scriptures. However, near Smolensk in 1949, at the famous Gnizdovsky excavation site, a jug, almost intact, with an interesting inscription was found. This inscription was made quite clearly in Cyrillic, while the find dates back approximately to the middle of the 10th century. That is, the Cyrillic text was applied to the jug several decades before the baptism of Russia. This text is very short, just one word. It looks like this. All letters are written clearly, very clearly visible. Gorokcha. Historians and linguists are at a loss. Maybe it's about the mustard. You know how housewives in modern kitchens sign jars so as not to forget what is stored where. Or perhaps it means that something fuel was stored in the jug. For example, a mixture for Greek fire. Perhaps we have before us a jugs of some merchant who arrived from Moravia or from the Balkans, where the Cyrillic alphabet has already received a certain distribution. Then he could use this new but already very convenient alphabet for the Slavs to sign his property. When everyone was rich. In 1958, archaeologists made a discovery that was not inferior in importance to the discovery of Troy. In the valley of the Konya River in Turkey, the attention of researchers was attracted by an unusual place, which the locals called Çatalhöyük, or Double Hill. The largest of the two hills was 17.5 meters high, and archaeologists hoped to find something of interest here. The discoveries made in Çatalhöyük exceeded the wildest expectations. Archaeologists have unearthed an ancient city whose age has been dated between 6,800 to 5,800 BC. Such an age of the settlement seemed so unrealistic that its dating caused a wave of criticism of the method of radionuclide analysis. A few thousand years before our era, the division of human society into rich and poor has not yet occurred, and all the inhabitants of the city of Çatalhöyük had approximately the same income. As archaeologists managed to find out, they were quite rich. About 5,000–6,000 people lived in the city, which was a lot for that time. The life expectancy of the townspeople was also quite long. The inhabitants of Çatalhöyük were mainly engaged in the cultivation of cereals. However, cattle breeding was also developed in the city. On the territory of the settlement, archaeologists also found bones of fish and birds, vultures. From the Mediterranean coast, materials used to make jewelry, vessels, figurines were brought to the city. These were shells, marble, black limestone, etc. In addition to women's jewelry, mainly beads, archaeologists found in the city baskets with rouge, shells with some creams, and obsidian mirrors. In the beautiful temples of the city of Çatalhöyük, only women served. One of the most amazing finds made in the religious buildings of the city was the Star of Bethlehem, painted on the walls of one of the temples. Previously, archaeologists did not assume that this symbol has such ancient roots. Diseases that killed ancient Egypt. Thousands of years ago in the Eastern Mediterranean, several Bronze Age civilizations at about the same time were on the verge of collapse. The ancient kingdom of Egypt and the Akkadian Empire collapsed, and a widespread social crisis broke out in the ancient Near East and the Aegean Sea, which manifested itself in population decline, destruction, a decrease in trade, and significant cultural changes. In remains excavated from an ancient tomb in Crete, in a cave called Aios Karalendos, a team led by archaeogeneticist Gunnar Newman of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany has discovered genetic evidence for the existence of bacteria responsible for two of the most serial diseases in history: typhoid fever and plague. Therefore, according to the researchers, the widespread diseases caused by these pathogens cannot be discounted as a contributing factor to the social changes that were so widespread from about 2200 to 2000 BC. Yersinia pestis is the bacterium responsible for tens of millions of deaths, most of which occurred in 3 devastating global pandemics. It turned out that this bacterium has been infecting humans since at least the Neolithic period. Last year, scientists discovered that a Stone Age hunter-gatherer likely died of the plague thousands of years before there was evidence that the disease had reached epidemic proportions. Cyclops skull. 2001, May 21st. A strange skull was found in the Rhodope Mountains, which the Bulgarian media soon dubbed the mystical skull. According to the author of the unusual find, he dreamed of it at first. It turned out that Roman Genchev, an avid collector of meteorites, had had the same dream for almost a month. He was sent on a business trip. On his day off, he went to the mountains and found the skull of a strange creature. Everything turned out that way. The skull was immediately examined by scientists. First of all, using radiocarbon dating, they were able to establish his age and conducted a DNA analysis. As you can see, the data obtained were so intriguing that it was classified. But in the era of the internet, it is quite problematic to hide information about such an unusual find. Reports about it first appeared on the net and then in a number of printed publications. Unfortunately, I couldn't find data on the age of the skull, but if we take into account that only its front part was found, neatly cut down by someone in time immemorial, the mysterious creature clearly fell from the hand of a man. Perhaps the unknown monster hunter was Theseus, the legendary Athenian king who defeated the Minotaur. Yes, the victory over the particular monster doesn't look like a myth. Presumably, the creature was small in stature, but it cannot be ruled out that the skull did not belong to an adult. We should also take into account the fact that we know nothing about the fighting qualities of the monster. Perhaps it had the ability to telepathically affect a person, spit poison, or operated under the cover of night, attacking from an ambush. The Roanzi Codex. The Roanzi Codex is a very ancient manuscript with many strange illustrations. This mysterious book has 448 pages. The author of this work is unknown, as well as the language in which it was written. The alphabet of this mysterious language contains 200 letters, and the pictures vary from images of military battles to a variety of religious symbols. The manuscript was found, as often happens, completely by accident. In the first half of the 19th century, it was presented to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences by Count Gustav Batthyány, along with 3,000 other books. The count was from the city of Roanzi, and it is to that the manuscript owes its name. Now this city is called Rachnitz and is a territory of Austria. The book has rather modest dimensions, only 10 by 12 centimeters. On each page, from 9 to 14 rows of text are written by hand in some mysterious characters. The total number of characters that are used in the code is approximately 800. This is almost 10 times the size of any alphabet known to date, and most letters are sometimes repeated several times. Analysis of the paper show that the Roanzi Codex was written around the 16th century on Venetian paper. Once Hungarian scholars suggested reading the codex upside down, so the text resembled the Sumerian script. The Armenian philologists Vairika and Nečić suggested that the text was originally written in the vulgar Latin dialect of Dacia. The direction of writing in it is from right to left and from bottom to top. Indian Mahesh Kumar Singh believes that the book is written from left to right and from top to bottom in a still undocumented version of the Brahmi script. The scientist transliterated the first 24 pages of the codex. As a result, he received the text in Hindi. According to other experts, the text of the book is a kind of code system. The language in which all this is written is of artificial origin, simply speaking, made up. Experts say that the Roanzi Codex is a common Catholic prayer book. It mainly contains paraphrases from the New Testament that tell about the early life of Jesus Christ. In the book, scientists even found the date when it was written. This is 1593. Most experts recognize this version of the decryption as the most probable. It has practically no flaws. And there are practically no flaws in our channel as well. This is confirmed by your views and kind comments. Stay with us further. Thanks for your views. Bye everyone.